My name is Naomi Carter, and I am 29 years old. 3 days after my father begged for my forgiveness on his knees, my mother was escorted out of our family home with 2 suitcases and nowhere to go. She was crying. My brother wouldn't look at her. My little sister refused to speak to her. And the neighbors stood outside pretending not to watch. 8 years earlier, that same woman had convinced everyone I was a thief. 8 years earlier, she helped throw me out into the streets with nowhere to sleep. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. The most shocking part was why she did it. Because hidden behind years of lies, secrets, and betrayal was a truth so devastating that it destroyed my entire family in less than 48 hours. A truth uncovered by a hospital emergency. A DNA test. And one question a doctor never should have asked. I still remember standing in the hallway of St. Augustine Medical Center watching my father cry for the first time in my life. Not because he was dying. Not because he was sick. But because he had just discovered that the daughter he called a criminal was the only child who had never betrayed him. And the woman he trusted most had been lying to him for years. Before I tell you how a simple hug, a missing stack of cash, and one hospital emergency destroyed everything, welcome back to Her Revenge Stories. If you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with suspense, shocking twists, and powerful life lessons, please take a moment to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Now let me take you back to the summer of 2014. Back to the day my mother first started seeing me as a threat. Back in the summer of 2014, I was 21 years old and living with my family in the quiet upscale neighborhood of Cedar Brook Heights, just outside Columbus, Ohio. If you drove past our house back then, you'd probably think we were one of those perfect American families people secretly envy. Big 2-story brick home. Fresh-cut lawn every Saturday morning. My mother's flower pots lined neatly across the porch. My father's black SUV always parked perfectly straight in the driveway like somebody measured the distance with a ruler. From the outside, the Carters looked solid. Untouchable. But come to think of it now. Most broken families usually look perfect to strangers. My father, Gregory Carter, was one of the most respected logistics contractors in the state. He managed warehouse expansion projects for retail companies across different cities, which meant he traveled constantly. Sometimes for weeks. Sometimes for months. And when my father was home, the entire atmosphere of the house changed immediately. You could literally feel it. Everybody became more careful. More alert. Even the sound of footsteps in our hallway changed when Dad was around. He believed discipline was the reason successful families survived. Inside our house, rules weren't suggestions. They were law. Nobody came home after 6 p.m. without permission. Dinner was exactly 7 p.m. No yelling. No disrespect. No lying. And absolutely no stealing. My father hated thieves with a level of anger that honestly scared me sometimes. I still remember one evening when a teenage cashier at a grocery store accidentally gave him $20 extra in change. Dad drove nearly 15 minutes back to return it because, according to him, integrity follows you when nobody's watching. That was the kind of man he was. Strict. Controlled. Proud. But despite all that hardness, he genuinely loved us. Especially after doctors discovered his heart condition a few years earlier. I didn't know the full details back then. Honestly, none of us did except my mother. I just remember overhearing arguments late at night sometimes. Mom crying quietly in the kitchen. Dad insisting he was fine. There were pill bottles hidden in his office drawer he never explained. Some mornings he'd press his hand against his chest like he was uncomfortable, then pretend nothing happened when anyone noticed. Looking back now, I think my mother carried that secret alone for years. My mother, Lorraine Carter, owned a neighborhood supermarket about 15 minutes from our house. Everybody loved her. She remembered customers' birthdays. She donated canned food during Thanksgiving drives. Teachers from my little sister's school used to stop her just to talk. To outsiders, she looked warm and graceful. Like the perfect wife. The perfect mother. And maybe at some point she truly was. I had 2 siblings. My older brother, Caleb, was 24 then. Quiet guy. Smart too. He always tried so hard to make my father proud that sometimes it felt painful to watch. He dressed like Dad. Talked carefully around Dad. Even sat exactly the way Dad did during dinner. Then there was my little sister, Ava. She was 12 years old and basically the sunshine of our house. Loud laugh. Messy ponytail. Always asking weird random questions at dinner. Dad adored her openly. And then there was me. The difficult child. At least that's what Dad called me whenever we argued. I wasn't bad. I just hated feeling controlled all the time. I questioned rules. I pushed boundaries. Sometimes I came home 10 minutes late just because I was tired of feeling trapped. And honestly, that usually ended badly for me. But despite our clashes, there was one thing my father secretly respected about me. I told the truth. Always. Painfully honestly sometimes. Whenever he returned from business trips, I told him everything that happened while he was gone. Who visited? Who argued? What broke in the house? What Ava did at school? Literally everything. And my mother hated that habit more than I realized at the time. Because unknown to me then, there were certain secrets inside our house she desperately needed buried forever. There was a man named Benjamin Lawson. Everybody called him Uncle Ben. He had been my father's closest friend since college, long before my parents even got married. According to family stories, they were practically inseparable in their 20s. Same dorm. Same business classes. Same terrible apartment after graduation where they survived on instant noodles and gas station coffee while trying to build their careers. So naturally, Uncle Ben was treated like family. He came to birthdays, Christmas dinners, graduation parties, even random Sunday cookouts in our backyard. When I was little, I honestly thought he was some kind of distant relative because he was around so much. And unlike my father, Ben was easygoing. Funny. Relaxed. The kind of adult who let you eat ice cream before dinner and covered for you afterward. Every time Dad traveled for work, Uncle Ben visited at least once or twice to check on us. That's what he always said. Just making sure my second family is doing all right. And honestly, nobody questioned it. Especially not me. Back then, I trusted everybody in my house. That was my first mistake. I still remember this one Saturday evening in August 2014 so clearly it almost feels like a movie scene burned into my memory. Dad had already been gone nearly 7 weeks for a warehouse expansion project in Seattle. The house honestly felt lighter whenever he traveled. Less tense. Less controlled. That evening, Uncle Ben showed up carrying pizza boxes and 2 shopping bags filled with snacks and gifts. My little sister Ava nearly tackled him at the door screaming. Caleb laughed harder than I'd heard him laugh in months. Even my mother looked unusually relaxed. We spent hours eating pizza in the living room while some old action movie played in the background. Ben joked constantly, making Ava choke on soda from laughing too hard. At one point, he tossed me a small box with a silver bracelet inside. Thought this matched your stubborn personality, he joked. I rolled my eyes but secretly loved it. Looking back now, maybe that's why the betrayal hurt so badly later. Because none of it felt fake at the time. Around 10 p.m., Ben finally got ready to leave. Like always, my mother walked him to the gate outside. That part was normal too. Meanwhile, I realized I'd forgotten my college assignment notebook downstairs near the couch. I had class notes due the next morning, so I hurried down half asleep wearing oversized sweatpants and one of Caleb's old hoodies. I grabbed the notebook from the coffee table and headed toward the front door because I heard voices outside. And that's when I saw them. My mother and Ben standing near his car underneath the porch light. Holding each other tightly. Not casually. Not friendly. It lasted longer than a normal hug. Long enough for something inside me to pause without understanding why. But my brain didn't process danger yet. Honestly, I smiled. Ah. Mom missed Uncle Ben. I laughed while stepping outside. The reaction I got was immediate. They jumped apart so fast it startled me. Ben cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom looked pale. Like genuinely pale. For a second nobody spoke. The whole atmosphere changed so suddenly that even the crickets outside felt louder. I remember laughing nervously because I thought maybe I interrupted some emotional conversation. Okay. That was weird, I joked. Ben forced a smile. Your mom's just dramatic. A few minutes later, he drove away. And the second the headlights disappeared down the street, my mother's entire expression changed. That night, sometime around midnight, she walked quietly into my bedroom while I was studying. No smile. No softness. Just tension. You must never tell your father about tonight. I looked up slowly, confused. What? The hug. Yes. I actually laughed a little. Mom, it was just a hug. But she didn't laugh back. I'm serious, Naomi. Something about her voice made my stomach tighten. And then for the first time in my entire life, my mother looked afraid of me. 3 months later, my father finally returned home from Seattle. I still remember hearing the sound of his black SUV pulling into the driveway just after 6 p.m. on a rainy Thursday evening in November 2014. The whole house suddenly came alive. Ava ran downstairs so fast she almost slipped on the last step. Caleb rushed outside to help with luggage. Even my mother looked excited, fixing her hair quickly in the hallway mirror before opening the front door. And me? I smiled without even realizing it. Because no matter how strict my father was, his presence made our house feel complete in a strange way. Dad stepped inside smelling like cold air, coffee, and airport terminals. He hugged Ava first, then Caleb, then me. His arms squeezed tighter than usual around my shoulders. Still causing trouble. He joked quietly. I rolled my eyes. Nice to see you too. For the first hour, everything felt warm and normal again. Mom made pot roast with roasted potatoes because it was Dad's favorite meal after traveling. Ava kept interrupting dinner every 2 minutes with random school stories while Caleb talked about work and football scores. Dad laughed more that night than he usually did. And honestly, I think that's why what happened next became burned into my memory forever. Because the shift was so sudden. So uncomfortable. I was sitting across from my father, absent-mindedly playing with my fork while telling him random stories from the months had been gone. The neighbors fighting over fences. Ava getting detention for drawing on her science project. Caleb nearly crashing Dad's lawnmower. Little harmless things. Then without thinking, I smiled and said casually. Oh, and Uncle Ben came around a lot too. Mom even hugged him outside one night because she missed him. The silence that followed. It felt physical. Like all the air got sucked out of the dining room at once. Even Ava stopped chewing. I looked up slowly, confused by everyone's expressions. My father's eyes moved toward my mother. Not angrily at first. Just slowly. Carefully. Mom forced a small laugh and reached for her water glass. "It was nothing," she said quickly. "Ben was just helping around the house while you were gone." Dad nodded once. But I noticed something shift behind his eyes. Not full suspicion yet. Just discomfort. The kind that quietly plants itself into somebody's mind. Dinner continued after that, but it never fully recovered. The energy changed. Dad became quieter. Mom barely looked at me. And honestly, I didn't understand why. Later that night, while I was heading downstairs for water, I overheard my parents arguing softly inside their bedroom. Dad's voice stayed controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath it. "You know I don't like things like that, Lorraine." It was one hug, Gregory. "That's not the point. You're overthinking this." Then silence. I backed away before they noticed me. At the time, I honestly thought it would blow over by morning. I was wrong. Because after that night, something inside my mother changed completely toward me. Not immediately. At first it was subtle. Cold stares. Sharp responses. Less patience. Then it slowly became worse. Way worse. A broken plate while washing dishes. Punishment. Coming home 12 minutes late from class. Punishment. Forgetting to switch laundry loads. Punishment. One Saturday morning she made me scrub the kitchen floor with a toothbrush because I forgot to wipe crumbs off the counter after breakfast. And the strange part? Dad barely noticed. Most of it happened while he traveled. Whenever I tried explaining things to him over the phone, Mom acted sweet and concerned in front of him like nothing was wrong. Sometimes I caught her staring at me in this strange distant way that honestly made me uncomfortable. Like she was thinking about something constantly. Like she didn't trust me anymore. Caleb noticed it too. One evening while Mom was aggressively folding laundry in the living room, he finally asked carefully, "Why are you always angry at Naomi lately?" Mom looked up immediately. Too quickly. "Mind your business." The room went silent. Caleb slowly nodded and backed off, but I caught the expression on his face afterward. And for the first time, I realized my brother was starting to suspect something too. A few months later, sometime around February 2015, my father started preparing for another out-of-state business trip. By then, the atmosphere inside our house already felt different. Tense. Careful. Like everybody was silently trying not to trigger something. Especially me. I had started avoiding my mother whenever possible because honestly, I never knew what version of her I was going to get anymore. Some days she acted normal. Other days, it felt like she couldn't stand hearing my voice. And weirdly enough, every time Dad traveled, things became worse. The night before his trip, snow covered most of our street. I remember because Caleb and I helped Dad carry luggage into the garage while icy wind blew through the driveway. Inside the kitchen, Mom kept reminding Dad not to stress himself too much during the trip. "You need rest too, Gregory." Dad gave a tired smile while organizing papers into his briefcase. "I'll rest when people stop needing shipments delivered." Typical Dad response. Later that night, while everyone was upstairs, I walked past my parents' bedroom and noticed Dad counting cash near his dresser drawer. A lot of cash. Stacks of $100 bills. He noticed me immediately. $5,000 for contractor payments, he said casually before locking the drawer halfway. "Remind me in the morning not to forget it." I nodded and kept walking. That should have been the end of it. But the next morning changed my life forever. I woke up to shouting. Not regular shouting. The kind that immediately sends fear through your chest before you even know what happened. I rushed downstairs wearing sweatpants and socks while Ava stood frozen near the staircase already crying. Dad was furious. I had never seen his face look like that before. Red eyes. Shaking hands. His voice echoing through the entire house. $1,000 is missing. Nobody moved. Mom stood near the kitchen island pretending to look shocked. Caleb looked confused and exhausted, like he barely understood what was happening. Dad immediately started questioning everybody. Aggressively. Who went into my room? Nobody answered. Then suddenly his eyes landed on Caleb. You asked me for money last night. Caleb blinked hard. What? Dad, seriously? You needed cash for your car repairs. I didn't take anything. For nearly 20 minutes Dad searched Caleb's room first. Closets. Drawers. Laundry baskets. Nothing. The whole house felt suffocating. Then he turned toward me. You. Room. Now. I still remember my stomach dropping as we walked upstairs. Not because I was guilty. But because my father in that mood terrified everybody. Dad searched everything. My desk. Closet. Under my mattress. Even my laundry bag. Mom stood quietly near the doorway watching the entire thing unfold while Ava cried downstairs. Then suddenly, Dad unzipped one of my school bags sitting near the corner chair. And froze. I watched him slowly pull out a thick stack of cash wrapped in a bank band. My brain literally stopped processing. I remember blinking repeatedly because it didn't even feel real. That's not mine, I whispered immediately. Nobody answered. Dad stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Then his voice exploded so loudly Ava screamed downstairs. I knew you were stubborn, he shouted, but I didn't know I was raising a criminal. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. That money is not mine. I screamed back. I swear to you. But then my mother quietly spoke from behind him. Softly. Almost carefully. So this explains why money has been disappearing from my supermarket lately. The room went silent. Dad slowly turned toward her. You've been losing money too. Mom nodded sadly. A few times now. I stared at her completely frozen. Because something about her expression suddenly felt wrong. Not shocked. Not hurt. Prepared. Like she already knew exactly how this moment would unfold. And then I looked toward Caleb. For one brief second, our eyes met. And the look on his face. Pure fear. Like he had just realized something terrible before the rest of us did. That same night, my father threw me out of the house. Not temporarily. Not to teach me a lesson. He meant it. I remember standing in the middle of the living room shaking so badly I could barely keep my balance while snow and freezing rain hit the windows outside. My suitcase sat near the front door. Half-packed. Messy. Like even the person packing it didn't fully believe what was happening. I didn't steal from you. I kept crying. Dad, please listen to me. But my father wouldn't even look at me anymore. That hurt more than the shouting. More than the accusation. The way he completely stopped seeing me as his daughter in a single night. I will not keep a thief in my house, he said coldly. His voice sounded tired now instead of angry, and honestly. That somehow felt worse. My little sister Ava was sobbing upstairs. I could hear her through the hallway. Caleb stood near the staircase looking pale and completely lost. Twice he opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. Twice he stopped himself. Meanwhile, my mother played her role perfectly. Gregory, maybe she learned her lesson already, she said softly. Fake concern. Fake sadness. Even through my tears, I could feel it. And for the first time in my life, fear started turning into something else. Suspicion. I looked directly at her. She avoided my eyes immediately. That moment still stays with me. Because deep down, I think both of us understood exactly what was happening. I just couldn't prove it. Dad grabbed my suitcase and opened the front door himself. Cold wind rushed inside instantly. You can come back when you decide to tell the truth. And just like that, I was gone. I walked through freezing rain with nowhere to go. No money except $36 in my wallet. No friends close enough to call at midnight. My phone battery was already dying. I remember sitting at a bus stop for almost an hour crying so hard my chest physically hurt. Cars passed occasionally, headlights cutting through the darkness while icy rain soaked through my hoodie. Nobody stopped. Nobody noticed me. Eventually, sometime after midnight, I found an abandoned church near the highway about 2 miles away. The front doors were cracked open slightly. Inside smelled like mold, dust, and old wood. Broken stained glass windows let cold wind leak through the building. Rain dripped steadily from parts of the damaged ceiling into metal buckets someone had placed around the room. But at least it was warmer than outside. So I stayed. That first night destroyed something inside me emotionally. Around midnight, 2 drug addicts started arguing violently outside near the parking lot. I could hear bottles breaking and somebody yelling threats. Then maybe an hour later, a homeless man stumbled into the church screaming nonsense and kicking over chairs near the front aisle. I hid behind the altar shaking so hard I thought he'd hear my breathing. At one point he started laughing loudly to himself while dragging something across the floor. I honestly thought I was going to die there. By sunrise, I hadn't slept even 1 minute. For 3 days, I survived like that. Hungry. Cold. Humiliated. I charged my phone at a gas station once and kept trying to call my father. Over and over again. Straight to voicemail every time. Then finally my mother answered one afternoon. For a second hope rushed through me. "Mom. It's your father's decision," she interrupted coldly. "Please, I didn't do this." Long silence. Then quietly, almost emotionlessly, she said. "You should have stopped creating problems a long time ago, Naomi." And she hung up. I just sat there staring at my dead phone afterward feeling completely numb. Meanwhile, unknown to me, Caleb was slowly falling apart too. Every night he replayed the same memory repeatedly in his head. Mom walking near my room earlier that morning. Mom acting strangely calm during the search. Mom accusing me almost too perfectly. Then around 2 a.m. one night, guilt finally overcame him. He sent me a text message. "I'm sorry. I don't think you did it." But by then, something inside me had already broken. And honestly, I didn't trust my family anymore. On the 4th day after being thrown out, I met Margaret Hayes. Honestly, if she hadn't stopped that morning, I don't know what would have happened to me. I was sitting alone outside a Greyhound bus station on the east side of Columbus, wrapped in a damp hoodie, trying to warm my hands around a cup of terrible vending machine coffee I couldn't even finish drinking. I hadn't slept properly in days. My eyes burned constantly. My stomach hurt from barely eating. And emotionally, I felt empty. People walked past me non-stop carrying luggage and talking on phones while I sat there trying not to cry in public again. Then this older woman suddenly stopped in front of me. "You look like you haven't been home in a while," she said gently. I looked up slowly. She had gray curls tucked under a knitted winter hat and tired eyes that somehow still looked kind. That was Margaret. I don't even know why I told her my story. Maybe because I was exhausted. Maybe because nobody else had listened. Or maybe because for the first time in days, somebody actually asked if I was okay and sounded like they meant it. Margaret listened quietly while I cried outside that station for almost an hour. Then finally she sighed softly and said, "You can stay with me until you figure things out." That tiny sentence changed my life. Margaret lived in a small apartment above an old laundromat in a rough neighborhood nearly 40 minutes from Cedar Brook Heights. The place was tiny. The heater barely worked half the time. Sometimes roaches appeared near the kitchen sink no matter how much bleach we used. At night, police sirens echoed constantly outside. I went from a beautiful suburban home with heated floors and family dinners to sleeping on a pull-out couch beside a flickering television. And yet strangely, that tiny apartment felt safer than my own house ever did after the accusation. Life became brutally difficult after that. Margaret survived mostly on retirement checks and whatever little money she made sewing clothes for people nearby. So I started working almost immediately. At first, I cleaned tables at a diner overnight. Then came dishwashing jobs. Then grocery stocking. Then working inside a noisy construction cafeteria serving food to exhausted workers at 5 a.m. every morning. Some days I worked 2 shifts back-to-back before attending nursing classes exhausted and half awake. There were nights I cried quietly inside public bathroom stalls because my feet hurt so badly I could barely stand anymore. But I refused to quit. Because deep down, I needed to prove something. Not just to my father. To myself. I needed to know my life wasn't over because somebody lied about me. Years passed slowly like that. And little by little, nursing became the one thing keeping me alive emotionally. Meanwhile, back home, guilt was quietly destroying Caleb too. Every time Dad angrily called me that thief, Caleb went silent. Every single time. At first Dad thought he was just uncomfortable discussing me. But really, Caleb was drowning internally. Over the years he started noticing things he ignored before. Late-night phone calls between Mom and Uncle Ben that stopped immediately whenever he entered rooms. Secret conversations outside. Tension. Whispers. One Thanksgiving evening, Caleb walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and found Mom quickly hiding her phone while Uncle Ben avoided eye contact completely. That moment stayed with him for months. Then came smaller things. Ben touching Mom's arm too comfortably. Mom smiling differently around him. The strange silence whenever Dad talked about loyalty or family. Sometimes Caleb even pulled out old photo albums late at night staring at pictures of himself beside Dad. Searching. Comparing. Trying to understand why they never truly looked alike. Different smile. Different eyes. Different posture. But every single time those thoughts appeared, Caleb pushed them away immediately. Because Gregory Carter was the only father he had ever known. And somewhere deep inside himself, I think Caleb was terrified of what would happen if the truth ever surfaced. 8 years later, at 29 years old, I finally became a registered nurse. Honestly, there were days I never thought I would make it that far. Not after everything. Not after sleeping inside abandoned buildings. Not after working double shifts while studying with swollen feet and barely enough money for groceries. But somehow, I survived. And in May of 2023, I got transferred to another branch of St. Augustine Medical Center located just outside Cedar Brook Heights. Closer to home. Closer to the people I spent years trying to forget. A few weeks before the transfer, my younger sister Ava secretly called me late one night. Her voice sounded shaky. "Dad's been really sick," she whispered. "Like, worse than they're telling people." I stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then she said something that made my stomach twist immediately. "I heard Mom talking on the phone one night." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ava lowered her voice even more. "She admitted she framed you." The words didn't even register properly at first. I actually laughed a little from disbelief. That doesn't even make sense. I'm serious, Naomi. But honestly, part of me couldn't handle believing it yet. Because if it was true, then my entire life had been destroyed intentionally. Weeks later, on my very first shift at the new hospital branch, everything exploded. The emergency alarm started around 8:40 p.m. Doctors rushed through the hallways. Nurses sprinted between trauma rooms. A critically ill patient had just arrived suffering severe cardiac complications and massive blood loss after collapsing at home. The patient needed an emergency transfusion immediately. Unfortunately, the blood type was extremely rare. I was still helping organize supply carts when I heard one of the nurses say, "Get the family tested now." A few minutes later, while moving equipment through the emergency hallway, I noticed something that stopped me cold. My mother. Standing outside trauma room 3 looking terrified. And beside her, Caleb. He looked older. Tired. Like life had slowly drained him over the years. Neither of them noticed me yet. Everything suddenly felt strange inside my chest. Then doctors started taking blood samples rapidly. My mother first. Then Caleb. Everyone moved urgently because time was running out. But nearly 20 minutes later, the atmosphere shifted. One doctor stared at the results twice. Then looked at another doctor. Confused. "How is the son not compatible?" he whispered quietly. Caleb heard it. I saw the exact moment panic entered his face. Real panic. Not confusion. Fear. The doctors immediately began screening hospital staff for emergency donor compatibility. And somehow, I matched. Perfectly. At that point, I still didn't know who the patient was. I just knew somebody was dying. So I donated immediately. The entire process happened fast. Bright lights. Cold machines. Nurses rushing everywhere. By the time the transfusion finished, I felt lightheaded and exhausted. But the patient stabilized. Hours later, around 4 a.m., I finally saw the name attached to the chart. Gregory Carter. My father. I actually stopped breathing for a second. The same man who threw me away like garbage 8 years earlier had just survived because of my blood. The next morning, after regaining consciousness, Dad learned an anonymous hospital staff member had saved his life. But something else was already consuming him mentally. Why wasn't Caleb compatible? Why did the doctors look suspicious? Why did everybody suddenly seem uncomfortable around him? Ignoring my mother's protests completely, Dad demanded a DNA test immediately. The results came back the following afternoon. And everything shattered. Caleb was not his biological son. The entire hallway erupted into chaos. My father screamed so loudly patients started opening their doors to watch. "You lied to me," he shouted at my mother. For years. Nurses froze. Visitors stopped walking. Even security guards started moving toward the scene. My mother broke down crying right there in the corridor. And finally, the truth came out. It was Ben. She sobbed. "During your trips, we had an affair. I saw Caleb physically stumble backward like somebody punched him in the chest." "No," he whispered. Dad looked completely destroyed. Like his entire identity collapsed in seconds. Then one of the doctors quietly stepped forward. "Sir, the donor who saved your life is here." And before I could even prepare myself, the door opened. I walked into the hallway wearing blue scrubs and my hospital badge. The silence became unbearable instantly. My father stared at me like he had seen a ghost. Not the rebellious 21-year-old he threw out years ago, but a grown woman. A nurse. The daughter he abandoned. The daughter he called a thief. The daughter he never searched for. Had just saved his life. His face crumbled completely. Naomi. Then suddenly, right there in front of doctors, nurses, patients, and strangers. My father broke down crying. Not quietly. Not politely. Completely. And after 8 years of pain sitting inside my chest, I looked him directly in the eyes and said softly, "I wish I knew it was you." The hallway stayed silent. Then I swallowed hard and finished quietly. Maybe I wouldn't have donated. After the hospital explosion that night, nothing about my family stayed the same. Nothing. The truth had ripped through everybody at once, and honestly, watching it happen felt unreal. Like standing inside somebody else's nightmare. Caleb barely spoke after the DNA results came out. He just stood there near the hospital wall staring at the floor while nurses quietly moved around us pretending not to listen. But everybody was listening. How could they not? 1 minute Gregory Carter was a respected businessman recovering from a near-fatal cardiac episode. And the next minute his wife was confessing to an affair in the middle of a crowded hospital hallway. People whispered everywhere. Patients peered through half-open doors. Even security guards looked uncomfortable. But Caleb looked completely destroyed. Not angry at first. Just hollow. Like somebody had erased the foundation of his entire identity in one afternoon. I remember seeing him walk slowly toward the parking garage later that night while rain hit the pavement outside. Mom followed behind him crying, "Caleb, please listen to me." He turned around so suddenly she stopped walking. And for the first time in my life, my brother completely broke apart emotionally. "Do you know what it felt like?" he shouted. His voice echoed across the nearly empty garage. "Do you know what it felt like spending my whole life trying to deserve a father that was never even mine?" Mom burst into tears immediately. But Caleb kept going. "You made me compete for love I didn't even understand," he yelled. "You let him judge Naomi for years knowing she was innocent." I had never seen him like that before. Never. Not calm. Not controlled. Not careful. Just years of guilt and confusion finally exploding all at once. Then he said something quieter that honestly hurt even more. "I defended you in my head for years." Mom covered her mouth crying harder. "You destroyed all of us." And the worst part? He was right. Over the next few days, the Carter family scandal spread quietly around Cedar Brook Heights. Not publicly online or anything dramatic like that. Just whispers. Neighbors talking. Church members gossiping. People lowering their voices when my father's name came up. Meanwhile, my father became obsessed with one thing. Me. The hospital blood match had already planted suspicion in his mind. And after learning Caleb wasn't biologically his, he couldn't let the thought go anymore. So without telling anybody, he secretly ordered another DNA test. This time with me. The results came back 3 days later. Positive match. I was Gregory Carter's biological daughter. His only biological child. I still remember the look on his face when he saw the paperwork. One of the nurses later told me he sat alone in that consultation room for nearly 40 minutes afterward without speaking. Just staring at the results. Because suddenly every memory became poison to him. Throwing me out. Ignoring my calls. Leaving me homeless. Calling me a criminal. Believing lies over his own daughter. And from that moment forward, guilt completely consumed him. He started searching for me desperately. At first through the hospital administration. Then through old contacts. Then eventually through Ava, who finally gave him the address to my apartment after days of pressure. The first time he came, I didn't open the door. I just stood silently behind it while he knocked. "Naomi." Please. Hearing his voice outside my apartment after 8 years honestly made my chest hurt. I know you're in there. I stayed quiet. Then I heard him crying softly outside my door. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just broken. I failed you, he whispered. Still. I didn't open it. For weeks he kept coming back. Sometimes with flowers. Sometimes food. Sometimes just himself. Each visit looked worse than the last. He lost weight quickly after leaving the hospital. His hair seemed grayer. His shoulders heavier. And honestly, part of me wanted to keep hating him forever. I tried. God knows I tried. But eventually, watching guilt slowly destroy him became painful too. A few weeks later, my father called for a private family meeting at our old house in Cedar Brook Heights. The same house where everything began. Honestly, I almost didn't go. The thought of walking back through those doors again made my stomach tighten the entire drive there. Even after 8 years, I still remembered standing outside that house in freezing rain with a suitcase beside me while my own father shut the door in my face. Some memories never really leave your body. When I finally arrived that evening, 3 cars were already parked outside. Uncle Ben's silver Lexus. My mother's SUV. Caleb's truck. The porch light glowed softly against the cold evening air, and for a second I just sat inside my car gripping the steering wheel trying to breathe normally. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Ava. Please come inside. Dad's been waiting for you. The moment I entered the house, the tension hit me immediately. Nobody was speaking. My father sat near the fireplace looking older than I had ever seen him in my life. Not physically old exactly. Just emotionally exhausted. Like guilt had aged him faster than time. My mother sat stiffly on the couch avoiding eye contact completely. Uncle Ben looked pale and uncomfortable near the dining area. And Caleb. Honestly, Caleb looked like somebody still trying to figure out who he even was anymore. The silence dragged painfully until Dad finally stood up slowly. Then he looked directly at my mother. Tell them the truth. Mom immediately started crying again. I already told you what happened. No, Dad interrupted quietly. Tell all of it. The room became still. Even Ava stopped moving beside me. Then finally, after several long seconds, my mother broke. Completely. And the truth started pouring out piece by piece. She admitted the affair with Ben had lasted years longer than anybody realized. She admitted she became terrified of me after the hug incident because I constantly told my father everything happening inside the house. Every visitor. Every conversation. Every suspicious moment. You noticed too much, she whispered through tears. I just stared at her silently. Then Ava suddenly spoke up from across the room, crying harder now. I heard you talking on the phone before, she said shakily. You said Naomi was becoming dangerous. Mom covered her face immediately. But Ava kept going. You said if Dad ever found out about Ben, everything would be ruined. The room exploded emotionally after that. Dad turned away completely like he physically couldn't look at my mother anymore. Caleb sat down heavily on the edge of the couch staring at the floor. And then came the worst confession of all. Mom admitted she planned to eventually leave Dad for Ben after Dad's heart condition became worse over time. The silence afterward felt horrifying. Uncle Ben looked absolutely shattered sitting there. Not defending himself. Not speaking. Just staring downward in shame. Then my father finally looked at me again. And honestly, I think that was the exact moment he fully understood the damage he caused. Not just throwing me out, but abandoning the only child who truly belonged to him. A daughter who begged him to believe her while he chose everybody else instead. That night, Dad officially removed my mother and Caleb from all inheritance claims connected to the Carter family business. Legally. Permanently. But strangely enough, I didn't feel victorious watching it happen. Especially not toward Caleb. Because the more truth surfaced, the more I realized he had been trapped too. Manipulated. Used. Forced to live inside lies he never created. Before leaving that night, Caleb quietly stopped me near the front door. "I should have defended you," he said softly. I looked at him for a long moment. Then finally, after 8 painful years, I hugged him. And he broke down crying immediately. The Carter family never recovered after that night. Some damage simply changes people forever. But for the first time since I was 21 years old, I could finally breathe without carrying the weight of somebody else's lie. And honestly, sometimes the truth doesn't rebuild a family. Sometimes it just sets the right people free. Thank you for staying until the end. That means more than you know. If this story reminded you of your own or someone you love, please share this video. It might reach the person who needs it tonight. I'd really love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have forgiven your father after everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And there's another emotional story linked in the description that I think you'll connect with deeply, so check it out before you leave. And remember, you are always worth the trouble.